Wayne, you look nice and tan, man. That little trip to the coast must have done you well, huh?
I
Little
was actually
sun?
cracking up because you were in South Carolina, and I know you went there for a different reason, probably because you were taking care of mom. And I was in Laguna, and I've never been to South Carolina, but I heard the beaches there are incredible.
Yeah, it was nice. Mom's okay, just so everyone knows. She just,
Hmm.
she just banged her foot,
She hurt her foot, right? Did she
Yeah,
break
so
it or just?
no, she sliced it open on something on the beach. So
Well, your
I think it
mom's
was
feisty,
I
so
think it was glass. Or maybe she left some glass on there. I don't know. But no, Liz is good. Everybody's well.
okay.
Um But hey, look, we'll go ahead and get things cranked up here because Wayne, we did a show before the July 4th holiday because we wanted to give people some football talking points, and then last week happened when the Pac-12 and Big Ten just decided, you know what, we're gonna just not play non-conference games, and I'm curious to know how you handled that news, Wayne, because it affects not only your alma mater, but the school that you do sidelines for. And I mean, I know that sent shockwaves through the college football world, you especially. So how'd you take that news?
I think I saw it coming. I mean, this isn't the first time we've heard of this idea, right? But here's where I wish, like everything else in the world right now, we're a little bit more clear. Is because I can't wrap my brain around, like, if it's purely COVID, if I travel to Washington to play a football game versus traveling to, say, Alabama to play a football game, what's the difference? It's a money issue, I believe. I think it's a way to save money. I think it shortens travel. It may give them an opportunity to push back the start date because we have no idea, right? We don't know any schedules yet. For a school like UCLA, who had probably one of the tougher schedules in the nation the last couple of years, um, for a while, because we usually have, like last year, for example, next year's schedule, we have LSU on our schedule. The last couple of years, we've had Oklahoma. We've had, we play Cincinnati, which when you make that schedule looks like it's an easy game, and it turns out not being an easy game. But this year, we were supposed to have New Mexico State and Hawaii, and now if we go to an all Pac-12 schedule, guess who we get to add? Washington and Oregon. Now, as a football fan, heck yeah, bring it on, because I was raised in an era where if you won the Pac 10 when I played, you played in the Rose Bowl. And that was like the Super Bowl for us. We all know that the landscape of the college game has changed dramatically, but there's a part of me that enjoys this idea that we're going to get to see. I'll give you an example, and we know that the ACC and the SEC hasn't done anything yet.
For the
They're
Big
gonna
12. Yeah, they're
in the
still
Big 12. They're gonna wait,
back.
right?
And
It's
by the
it's the
way,
Big Ten.
Dan Wolken, USA Today, is going
Yeah.
to come by in about 30 minutes. We'll talk SEC with him.
Wouldn't it be cool if, when the schedules come out, let's just say that everybody follows suit, and because we're not even going to get into the fact that we're probably not even going to start in the fall anyway, because things are terrible right now. Things have gone off the rails. People, it's a mess. Schools are not opening. My wife and I are both teachers, and we're reading that every day. Like, are we going to go back to school or not? And so things are chaotic right now. Um, wouldn't it be great though if you lost a couple of the non-conference games, and again, I'll use your Roll Tide Alabama, and they would play Georgia and they would play Florida? Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't it be great? I know that there's 14 teams in those conferences and they're not going to play everybody, but wouldn't it be great if you replaced, whatever, podunk you that they play right before their rivalry game, and actually put in another conference game that mattered? So in reality, it stinks that you're going to lose Ohio State, coming to the Pac-12. It stinks that you're going to use Alabama SC. It stinks that you're going to lose that. That's terrible. But if we get college football and we get conferences that actually play closer to everybody, I think that could be okay. It's better than the alternative.
Sure. So here's the thing. One of the things that you mentioned there is, I think, up in the air about, okay, so if we're not playing a non-conference schedule because we want everyone to have a somewhat level playing field in terms of testing and being able to ensure that the people we're lining up against have been tested to the same extent that we have. Okay, that's all fine and well. But what has yet to be clarified is, are we replacing those non-conference games with more conference games? Because what might happen, and again, all this whole show is under the premise that there will be games, because we don't know that there's actually going
Right.
to be games. We're all hoping that there's games, because otherwise we're going to be working at Starbucks in a couple months. But my take here is, Clemson, South Carolina, that's an in-state rivalry. They're separated by a bus ride. SEC, ACC. That's a game that makes sense if everybody is okay with it happening. Now, I know the ACC and the SEC have yet to commit to what the Big Ten and the Pac-12 have, but you see where I'm going with this? I mean, there
No,
are
I
some
do.
rivalries that make sense if everybody wants to talk it out. Otherwise, you're going to have 8-game, 9-game, and then maybe some other teams that are playing 10, 11, 12-game seasons, which is going to be
But
weird.
but this can't be about proximity. If I go next door and I haven't been next door, I'm exposing myself to whatever they've exposed themselves to. I have no idea what my neighbors have done. I don't know what parties they've been to. I don't know what beaches they've been to. I don't know where they've been. So if I go next door, this proximity thing makes no sense to me. I mean, I want to see the rivalry games, but it's just as dangerous as going 3 states away.
Well,
I mean, maybe again, I've been told on social media that a couple of my comments are dumb. I made the comment on our friends that do the Bruin podcast show that always say "suck it, Hartzell" to you. What's Bruin? Great friends of the show, by the way.
yeah, it's in jest, but yeah.
No, I know they love you, Steven. You're actually warming their hearts as well. But I ended up doing a show with them the other night, and I made a comment that the way things are going without a vaccine, it's just common sense to me that whenever we reopen, we're going to have a spike. Like we're going to close, and it's going to slow down, and then we're going to open, and we're going to spike. And someone responded that that's like a stupid comment, and everybody just does what they're supposed to do. This will work. And I laughed at that because if anybody's ever studied history, there's one common element that makes every good idea suck in the end. People. We screw it up every time. It almost should be a constant, right? It's like you can come up with the greatest ideas in the history of mankind and people will find a way to mess it up. Social media is a great idea. It's an amazing idea. People have absolutely sucked the life out of it for me to the point where I almost hate it now.
Save that for Dan Wolken when he comes by, because this guy is living it every day. I mean, people are, and again, I don't, and you're not trying to make this a political show. I'm not implying that you are, but the whole wear a mask, don't wear a mask, open.
Everything's political
close,
now. Everything
it's so highly charged. So I want to try
to. Yeah. Well, we'll save it, but just to finish my thought about the proximity issue. But I mean, I'm one of those people, like I've always believed in the idea of perception is reality, which is a really scary thought. A lot of people truly think they're right on some horrible, horrible ideas and ways of thinking. And so I have to realize that as myself, that when I make comments that seem so obvious and so simple, that obviously I do not know everything. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a guy that pays attention, that reads a lot. But the proximity thing, it's when USC and UCLA play, they're as close of rivals as there is in the country. I mean, they're next door neighbors. When they play each other, every single player on their team and every single player on UCLA's team has different things they've been exposed to. I don't really my brain's having a hard time wrapping around like what's the difference between that game that's really close and a game that's 3 states away.
I will attempt to answer that. I think my understanding here, Wayne, is that, and we'll take your example of the crosstown. What is it? Crosstown rivalry, crosstown showdown. What's
rivalry,
the preferred nomenclature?
Rivalry, yeah, because it's fun to say rivalry. Yeah,
okay,
crosstown,
got it.
Yeah.
The idea is that UCLA and Southern Cal can both afford to test their players and coaches
Correct.
and support staff on equal levels. Now, not the case if it's UCLA and New Mexico State, because you don't know what's going on. Las Cruces, New Mexico, I believe. New Mexico State. Is that where we're at?
No idea.
Apologies if I got that wrong, guys.
Yep.
But you understand what I'm saying? It's a money thing. And again, not to wade into political waters, but it's a testing thing. We're seeing with the pro sports that have reopened, MLS, PGA, NBA, which is, going through practices down there in Orlando in the bubble. The testing is, it's still not quite perfect because it depends on what kind of test you get and what the turnaround time is, but they're catching positives in the bubble. I mean, college is not a bubble. If anything, it's a free-for-all. It's a petri dish. So It's going to be very interesting because schools have already had to shut down practices that have started. Ohio State, which opened, had a bunch of positives, closed. Now they've restarted practices. LSU, Cerber's boys, and Clemson had 30 some odd players who tested positive, and so they had to pull back the reins. I mean, it's so unknown, Wayne. It's so unknown. But at least the Pac-12 and Big Ten have made their thoughts known on what they want to do. They want to have the flexibility, and I expect the other three power conferences to follow suit.
And it makes it easier if you're going to do like, and we haven't talked about this yet, but a lot of people are mentioning spring schedules. And I know that Dr. Fauci, any doctor that you want to listen to, have talked about, how impressed they are with what's happening with the vaccines. I was just watching the news this morning, and they're talking about how they're already starting to go to human testing, and they're phase 3. Whatever.
Let's go science. Let's go science.
But we find constantly, and I will make another little statement about science is proven only to be disproven at a later date. And if you're not paying attention, I mean, and there was an example of this just earlier today when they were talking about, we thought that this was the case, and now it's not. And I know people don't want to hear that, and I'm not an anti-science person, but remember, we come up with these ideas constantly throughout history only to find out that, oh, wait a second, maybe we were wrong. That's not the case anymore. We're relying on a vaccine that, if you study the science, is going to be really difficult to get it right. And I heard someone say this earlier this morning that I thought was very, very interesting, that, are we going to just sit back and hope, shut everything down, and hope that this works? Because if we're fast tracking it to, say, the beginning of the year, which a lot of people have been throwing out that date, get around January, we can do this, then maybe we hold off football and then try to do a spring season, and then we have to worry about the quick turnaround and all that stuff. We'll get to that later. But what if it doesn't happen? Don't we have to learn to, someone said this earlier today on something I was watching, that, we may have to learn to live with this. We may need to learn to deal with the disease more than just hoping for a vaccine. So some of the other stuff they're studying might be just as important. And I'm not trying to be doom and gloom, but the history of figuring out a vaccine for a coronavirus hasn't been great. So it's interesting to me. I'm just, and then if people won't take it, because there's a lot of people out there that'll be like, I'm not taking that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, again.
So it's not this. I don't think it's going away anytime soon, and it scares the heck out of me. Because the world has changed. It's crazy.
Well, especially our world. I mean, in the United States, it has changed. The rest of the world, with the exception of the UK and Brazil and a couple of other places, like European soccer is back. Okay. Yep. Korean baseball is back. Sports in Asia are back. The United States, I think
the MLS started playing, golf started playing. I mean, they're doing some stuff.
Barely a sport. But the thing is,
I knew you were going to say that.
You've got the bubble that's been constructed, and in the case of these pro leagues, Wayne, you're talking about the NBA bubble. I read is $150 million bubble. Okay, it costs $150 million to bring these players into Disney World and protect them, put them in a hotel, and dudes are still testing positive. So it's going to be a challenge, as we get into the season, if there is a season, to start and then see how it reacts. And look, don't come at me with mortality rates. This is not about worst case scenario is a student athlete is in a hospital on a ventilator. We don't need to get to that point. That's not what it's going to take to shut down college football. We're on the precipice of college football being shut down right now because positive rates are through the roof, because there's a pandemic, people. And I understand everybody's wearing, hey, wear your mask. Yes, wear your mask. But it's mid-July, and we're within 9 weeks of the start of what was supposed to be the start of college football season. So in many ways, we're late to the party.
Again, and I agree, but almost everything we all say, and I'm going to try not to say anything because it's obvious. Almost everything we all say comes from a political bias. Almost everything we say. We can't help it. You see it in everything.
Is my political bias coming through in my commentary?
No, you do a really good job, but the idea that you probably are on the side that's against our current leadership and thinking that this has been handled very poorly, when I'm more on the idea that I don't know what president in the history of mankind could have handled this well. Pandemics are difficult. And we tend to love to be armchair quarterbacks on Monday
Sure.
and decide that we would have made all the great decisions that other people haven't made. And we're so muddy when it comes to what we see. The media and social media have actually merged. They're almost like it's the same entity now. And it's just confusing. This is a terrible time where most of us have no idea who to believe.
Yeah, that's a very big thing. Look, I'm a parent. I've got a soon to be 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. I mean, I
Yep.
have decisions with my wife that we need to make about school. Again, not going to turn it into a political show, but to your point, Wayne, where do I go to get answers? Because
That's yes. Thank
there
you.
have been some major
Thank you.
there have been some major issues with who to believe and who's giving out the right information, and so that should never happen. You should never have to look at a governing body and say, I don't know if the information you're giving
Yes.
me is valid or
And,
accurate. That's
and,
no good.
and just to make it clear, and I'll give you an example of this. I just watched. My wife and I just finished the 4-episode Jeffrey Epstein, which is
Oh,
just
why?
horrific, right?
That sounds extremely dark, Wayne. Come on.
But no, but there's politics in it.
Sure.
There was a total cover up, and there's big money and big power, and it's weird. And I'll transition back into sports from this because I don't want to go down this road. But you're exactly right, and you nailed it. Just so people don't, because people are probably trying to figure out my bias too. I'm over political parties. We need to have a serious shift in our political, the way we do things, because we're so polarized and we're so divided that somehow, some way, we need to have just a regular person that listens to good ideas, and tries to create change that's positive instead of always having that political, the Dems do this and the Republicans do this. It's really annoying. I'm excited to see, because I've said it before, we need coaches in politics. And I have no idea, because I haven't researched what Tommy Tuberville's political stance is on anything. I have no idea. But the point is, and I know this is I'm just using this as an example. Coaches every year have to bring together families and people of all different, more so than ever, by the way, right now, of all different political backgrounds, all socioeconomic backgrounds, culture, so many different things, and they have to make a team out of that group. Look at Nick Saban, for example. I mean, he brings in players from California all the way to, the East Coast. I mean, he covers the whole United States. He has to find a way to bring, because you can be talented, and if you don't come together as a team, you're not going to win. Everybody just thinks you throw a bunch of 5-stars out on the field and you're going to win because you have more talent. Yeah, you'll beat crappy teams, but you probably won't win championships, because eventually you're going to run into another talented team that they've come together as a team. It's real hard to do that as a society, right? And I wish that we had members of Congress, including, the executive branch as well, that could bring people together. We're not even close to that right now. I mean, we hate each other and our political. And again, not a political show, so I apologize. But I did want to go back to the money thing, Stephen.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to even look at what I sent you earlier? And if you didn't, don't worry about it.
No, it was a fantastic read, and I'll give you a chance to plug it here on the show. But yes, it's a jumping off point to a lot of things that have put us in this place that we're at right now.
It actually started with I heard Aaron Taylor from CBS doing an interview, and he was talking about the bigger picture of money, like rearing its ugly head right now. And I didn't even realize the amount of money in the last 10 years, like. People have almost doubled how much they're spending on college sports. And I've thought this for a long time. When I go back to my day and I walked into our locker room, it was better than my high school locker room at UCLA. It was really, really nice. I was more concerned about the players that had walked through that locker room before than I was about how nice it was. But our facilities have become stupid. Our coaching salaries have become stupid. And I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this, but I think it eventually could be the downfall of college sports. We're catering to that top 1 or 2% that are going to be future NFL players, and we're forgetting about the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of athletes that are going to school to get an education and are lucky enough to play college football. And it's going to change their life because they're going to get a degree. They're going to go on to great things. But we've created a situation where there's so much money involved. And it's the arms race, right? They're spending so much money on the sport. The bubble has to burst at some point in time, and it may be right now.
Yeah, the bubble may be bursting. The article that Wayne is referring to, Ira Schofel, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. Probably a
Thank you.
member of the tribe, so I should do better. But he writes for War Chant, which is the FSU rivals affiliate, and he talks about the spending in college sports. And here's a couple of numbers, which again are, I mean, it's sobering. It's it. I don't even want to say that's not the right word. The numbers are, they're hard to kind of wrap your head around.
Yep.
These are the types of numbers that we're talking about in college athletics. Okay, amateur athletics, quote unquote. Florida State, where Ira writes, over a 9-year span, Florida State went from spending $75 million a year in 2010 to $150 million in 2019. That's at Florida State. University of Georgia in 2010 spent $90 million on sports. 9 years later, they were spending $174 million. Texas A&M, which joined the SEC from the Big 12, went from spending $90 million in 2010 to $212 million 9 years later. Serber, your boys at Clemson, went from $60 million in 2010 to last year $134 million. So it's coaches' salaries, it's facilities. And Wayne, I know you don't want to hear this, but you can keep putting this money back into these things because you've got a surplus of it because of TV money. And guess what? You don't have to pay the workforce. They're student athletes. They're on scholarship. They're quote unquote getting theirs, but you keep putting this money back in. College athletics don't have rainy day funds. It's not like a university that's got this endowment that's just hanging out over here on the side. And by the way, that is not a rainy day fund either. Those are just numbers on a page. But to your point, Wayne, you cut the faucet off, which is what the NCAA did in the spring with no basketball tournament, and what we're facing in the fall with no football. All of a sudden, these athletic departments are going to be on life support.
Well, and we're seeing it already with some schools across the country. I know Stanford has cut. Now, granted, they're cutting programs that nobody else has. they have some, their fencing program that I'm not making fun of it because I like the idea of college athletics because, as I pointed out earlier, so many athletes. Like when I was growing up, and this is what bothers me, a scholarship was the golden ticket. It was this opportunity to go to college. We never thought about not getting paid. I was just stoked to be on TV. If they put me on a video game and I saw number 15 wearing a UCLA jersey on a low-tech video game, I was pumped. I wasn't like, where's mine?
Right.
I never thought that way. I wasn't raised that way. You could say it's because you were just naive back then. I don't think so. I make a lot of money off my UCLA, and I know people know that I'm a school teacher, so they're probably laughing at that comment. But I've made good money over my life because I played football at UCLA. I've got opportunities to be a broadcaster. I've got opportunities to be a teacher. And yeah, maybe I struggled a little bit. Maybe I didn't have enough money at the end of the month because I spent too much on crap I didn't need. Maybe I didn't use but that's how you learn. Everybody goes to college to learn. You don't just get to become a doctor because you're talented. You have to go to school first. You have to pay for it. And then you earn the right to be a pro. So yeah, I get what you're saying. There's so much money, but what these athletes get now, they get way more than we used to. They get gear pretty much, it seems like, whenever they want it. Their facilities are ridiculous. It's amazing what they have, and in my opinion, they don't need that much. Again, we're catering to that top 1-2%. And not only that, the money that football makes trickles down to all these other sports. So now how many other athletes are going to suffer? We talked about, I know Vanderbilt's doing a lot to kind of, that's an SEC school. I talked about Stanford dropping programs, and it's not going to stop there. If this football season doesn't happen, a lot of schools across the country are going to be like, we can't afford this anymore.
Yeah. No, there's no doubt. I mean, everybody's looking at trying to make up a deficit. The question is, how big is that deficit going to be?
And at the end of the day, that 1-2% of amazing athletes that are at, Clemson, that are at Alabama, you know what they're still going to be in a couple of years? They're still going to be millionaires.
Yeah, the top 1%.
I struggle to feel too bad for that group because, a lot of these guys have come out of high school and they're already on draft boards because they're so highly recruited. I worry about that kid that is sitting there right now because a lot of people are worried that if a spring season happens that, some of those elite players, bless you, Serber, a lot of those elite players are going to skip the season, right? You've heard this being talked about.
Let's get to that a little bit later because I think that's something where your head is literally going to explode.
We will, but it might explode. But what I keep thinking about, because this time gives us a lot of time to sit back and think, is there are a lot of players. The problem with agents in the world we live in is every athlete is told by someone, that they're one or two rounds better than they really are, right? That's the thing. I was a 4th or 5th round draft choice, and it turned into being a free agent because my agents told me that from day one. We're going to get you this. We're going to get you this. We're going to get you this, whatever. Okay, blah, 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 blah. And when you're a kid, you're like, of course I'm great. All athletes think that they're that guy. The problem is most of them aren't. And a lot of players, even that leave early for the NBA draft, don't even get drafted, right? They end up in the G League, and then they never make it. I mean, there's tons of stories like that. So for me, there would still be a ton of spring, even if it was a spring season, because they need to prove to NFL scouts that they're not a 4th rounder, they're a 2nd rounder. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I still think a lot of people would play. We might lose some of the surefire people. I still think Trevor Lawrence will play. Because I think Trevor Lawrence is. I think Trevor Lawrence likes football, and I think he loves his teammates, and I think he loves his coach, and I think he would do like Matt Leinart did years ago with USC. Even though he could have left, he stayed.
Boy,
I think he would play.
Nah. I think he's just going to take the money and run, right?
I mean, Wayne, all these guys love football to varying degrees. I get your point. Do you love football? Do you eat, breathe, and sleep this stuff? If you are a bona fide, certified first rounder,
get an insurance policy.
Yeah. Oh, boy. I mean, it's a lot easier said than done, man. That is.
I know. I've never. I know you guys. You may or may not be right. I don't. I would have never thought Christian McCaffrey would skip a bowl game.
Yeah,
I wouldn't have thought that. But and again, I'm just pointing out that or how with Justin Fields. I know is he too young?
By the way,
no. That's what I was going to say.
Now
because he hasn't won a championship. To have a chance at winning a national championship, I just feel like more college athletes want to make their mark than I think we give them credit for. I think so many of them you think are just thinking about the money. And I think some of them realize that like all these players throughout history that have actually played out their seasons are still making money. It's not like the money's going anywhere. And I also think, and this is maybe scary, but a lot of athletes don't go into every season thinking they're going to get hurt.
Of course. No, I understand. By the way, just quick footnote on Christian McCaffrey, who is now the highest paid NFL running back in the history of the league. He made the right choice. Okay.
Because he probably would have been hurt if he played in that bowl game.
We'll come back to the spring football talk in just a minute. Our man Dan Wolken has entered the chat. We're going to talk to Dan Wolken from USA Today coming up next. College Sports Now rolls on. We've got Dan Wolken from USA Today with us. Dan, thank you for making the time, first of all. I know you got a lot going on. We wanted to talk about the article you wrote regarding, the SEC, which is right now in kind of a holding pattern. They haven't formally made a decision about what they want to do in the fall, but, if the Big Ten and Pac-12 are any indication, you think they're going to follow suit and go conference only in terms of their football schedule?
I don't know if it'll be purely conference only because there is a significant pull, I think, for some of these schools to play in-state rivalry games. Georgia Tech, Clemson, South Carolina, Florida State. Those are important games that, again, assuming you get to that point in the season and the college football is still up and running, that you'd want to play those if possible. I think the reason why these leagues are looking at conference only is flexibility because you control the schedule. It's easier to move the pieces on the chessboard, and you don't have to worry about what's going on in other leagues. But, we'll see what happens. I don't know if they'll do that or they'll try to just, go conference only. But I do think that everyone will eventually end up in roughly the same place.
That being said, Dan, it is we're talking about all this right now, but the closer we get to start time, where schools would need to start practicing to prepare for a season, it just, and I'm trying to be optimistic about this the whole time because I want to see a football season, but it just seems like it probably isn't going to start when it's supposed to start.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think the one thing that should have probably been articulated at the beginning in very clear terms, but I think now is much more out front of the conversation, is that the ability to play college football is tied to the conditions in the country. And the conditions in the country, and certainly in the South, in places like Georgia and Texas and Florida and South Carolina, the conditions aren't very good. And it's all interconnected. You can't have college football as sort of this separate entity that's detached from the reality of what's going on. And the reason is because you can't put college football in a bubble. You can't put any college sports in a bubble. They're going to be played as part of the campus environment, as in a city, in a campus community, with very little defense against the coronavirus. So if the infection levels are still really high, and of course we know the domino effect, which is testing availability, which is hospital availability, all the PPE resources and all those things, that all trickles down to football. So you need to get the virus under control before you can really think about executing football the way it needs to be executed. And is that going to happen by September 1st? It's looking tough right now. So I think the next step would be, you try to maybe push it off till October and say, okay, buy us another month. Hopefully, the numbers come down. Hopefully we learn more about how to deal with certain things. If that doesn't work, then maybe you push it off later again, and then ultimately to spring, and then maybe it just doesn't happen. But yeah, I think time is running out. There's no doubt about it to have that season start when it was supposed to start.
I know you're not in these athletic director meetings, and the SEC had one, I think, last week and in Birmingham, and those are closed door meetings. I know you're not privy to what's being discussed in there, but when you go back to March, when all this was happening in real time, and you've got conference basketball tournaments getting banged and the NCAA tournaments getting banged, it's not a matter of the blame game, Dan, but do you look at conference commissioners, do you look at athletic directors and say you could have done more here, or are they hamstrung by their own governors within each state? I'm just curious what your take is on that.
There's certainly an element that has been political throughout all of this. We weren't a couple weeks into the lockdowns when, starting with the president of the United States, there was this idea that, we'll be open by Easter. We got to open the country. We got to get back to work. And, all of that stuff was divorced from the actual conditions. And as we saw, states started to lift restrictions and open back up before they had even reached the thresholds that had been outlined by the coronavirus task force. So, then you get into Memorial Day and holidays and all these other things that had happened, and people had believing, I think, that the worst was behind us, probably started to act a little bit irresponsibly. Now the numbers are back up. I don't know who is to blame, for all of it. I'm sure there's a lot to go around, but I do think that, when you heard people in college sports back in April and May talk about a football season, what they would say is, we'll follow CDC guidelines. That was what they said. And that, to me, is a framing that doesn't really put the onus on people. The reality of the situation was not what the CDC guidelines were going to be. The reality was always, can we all together, get this virus under control so that we can have football? We can't have football until X, Y, and Z happens. But it was never really framed that way, and I think that was a mistake. Would that have changed people's behavior? I don't know. But I think certainly that's the way I would have advised approaching it back then.
Sure.
All right. So Dan, when I started social media years ago, I follow majority sports people, including yourself, people that talk. And obviously we're all more than that. All of us are. We all have lives. We all pay attention to politics and stuff. I have never seen the shift from just a couple of years ago to today where you mentioned it being political. Everything seems to be political. When you post something, when you like something, when you write an article that ends up on, people respond to it in either I love you or you're a complete idiot and you should be kicked off the planet for being a bad person. I know that rivalries have been created. People get in arguments. People don't always agree with what you say. Some people love what you say. If you could just go into that a little bit, because you're very active.
Well, I'll go back to the Winter Olympics in 2018 in South Korea. I was over there writing a story one day about Norway was cleaning up they were winning everything at this particular Winter Olympics. They ran away with the medal count for the first time ever. And I was writing about why they were having such great success. And I wrote this piece about how Norway's youth development system doesn't emphasize winning and losing until they don't even keep score until like age 12 or something,
Right.
something like that. And really they focus on on having fun and making it so that the kids want to go and so that they don't get discouraged if they lose and all this kind of stuff. And and basically like the next day I wake up and my article had been aggregated for Breitbart, which is like this right-wing political website, and they're just trashing me for writing this article about Norway, about liberal socialist Norway. And it just, so this is not new, like this has been going on.
Right.
And a lot of it is with regard to the coronavirus has to do with, frankly, just news literacy. I think it's one of the biggest things in this country right now is news literacy. And there's this, this whole machine, economic machine that's built on, kind of injecting, muddying the waters and, conspiracy theories and saying, what you're being told is not real. And so you end up, with something like this, right? Where, people just, they refuse to accept what is happening and what is being reported because they're able to go to their safe space of misinformation, and it's just very hard to break through. And so when you're dealing with something like this, that's just that's just kind of where we are as a country, and it probably is why it's hard to fix a lot of these problems.
Yeah, but to your point, Dan, you cover the Olympics. I mean, you were supposed to be in Tokyo this summer. It's not like people are rooting. Wayne and I talk about this too. I mean, our gigs in the fall are tied to live sporting events. Well, if those live sporting events aren't here, that changes things for us. And look, no disrespect to restaurant owners and small businesses who have been dealing with this for 5 months, but that's something that creeps up when you're having these discussions. And it's like, look, I'm not rooting against sports. I mean, you've had furloughs this summer as a result of all of this. We all have.
Yeah. I mean, look, what I would say, and what I've told people before, is regardless of what I'm rooting for or not, that doesn't change the reality of the decisions that have to be made and some of the issues that are legitimate challenges and obstacles to sports, and specifically college sports, being played. This is a once in a century type of pandemic. It's a difficult circumstance and terrible situation for a whole lot of people. And sports are one thing that is particularly difficult to execute and pull off in this environment, because you can't really play a sport like football without risking a lot of transmission of a pretty dangerous virus. So I do not want to gaslight people into saying that this is easy. Let's just ignore it. The virus is going to go away. Just what's the big deal? That's not being honest. And so if I were, even if I were, rooting for games to be played and telling you that it's all going to be great, there's not going to be any problems, that would not be news reporting. That would be propagandizing. And that's just not what I'm in the business of doing.
So what made me think about when you were talking about this, how deep this is, now you add the movement for equality, the movement to end police brutality, the Black Lives Matter movement, all these movements for the LGBTQ community. There's so much going on at the same time while we're struggling with the pandemic. And I'm going to tie this into football. This is impacting football coaches across the country. We saw what happened at Florida State, what's happened at Clemson, what happened at Oklahoma State, even out in my neck of the woods at UCLA, with players rising up to say, hey, listen, we want to make sure we're safe when we start playing. Players across the country are now having a voice. And I can tell you this as a fact. Coaches, especially in my day, they wanted you to dedicate your life to football. Yeah, you can go to class, you can get an education, but you know what? You need to give this 110% of everything you're made of. And now we're living in a world where, and now you add the pay for play, you add all these elements into more freedom to players. That's going to create some issues going forward as well, in my opinion.
Well, look, the context of all of this stuff has changed. Players, because of the interconnectedness that we all have through social media, they understand that they can organize amongst each other. They are able to communicate with one another. They were able to share and compare, what life is like here and what life is like there. And of course, they also are they're smart and they see what's happening in the world. So the one thing about coaching, we can talk about X's and O's, recruiting, all the things that go into building a successful program. I think the biggest thing that's important to successfully coaching in college is adaptability. The skill to be able to say things have evolved in a certain way, and that if I am going to continue to connect with my players, if I'm going to still be able to inspire and lead and motivate players, I have to change the way that they have changed. And I think that's something that the successful coaches will figure out, and the guys who aren't as good, they will be exposed.
And you've covered the NCAA for a while, and just kind of talking about their struggles to keep up with the changing face of college sports. I'm curious just to get your take on where the NCAA fits into this, because I feel like going back to the spring when they were on the forefront of saying no more, we can't do the NCAA tournament. They've really been neutered over the last couple of months, and just kind of your take on that leadership void, because these conference commissioners, it does kind of have an every man for himself mentality.
Well, even if you remember at the time that the NCAA tournament was shutting down, the conferences were kind of in the dark, and they were having to make these decisions for themselves and talk amongst each other and figure out what to do. I mean, I remember very vividly, the Big Ten played that Wednesday night. The SEC played, I think the ACC played on that Wednesday. And then you go into Thursday, and I'm texting people in the leagues trying to figure out whether they're going to play Thursday, and they don't really know. And then Thursday morning, like dominoes falling over, they all cancel their conference tournaments. And the NCAA had nothing to do with that. And there was some frustration at that time from people in various leagues that they weren't getting enough guidance from the NCAA. It certainly exposes a flaw in the system, which is the lack of centralized control. The NCAA controls their tournaments, but football does not have a tournament under the NCAA banner. They control the playing rules, but they don't control the administration of the conferences. So everything is balkanized in college sports. That is done by design. It's done to maximize the revenue, frankly, that these schools get and the television exposure that these schools get. But what's the downside of it? Yeah, a situation like this where you do need somebody who's, kind of shepherding schools through this process to give advice, to set those kinds of standards. And even if the NCAA wanted to do that, I'm not sure they're really built in a way that they could.
Yeah.
All right, let's at least try to trickle in a little bit of actual football here, just for fun here. If the season does happen, and I hate saying that, this is weird. I feel like I'm living in the twilight zone. Like it's just odd. If it does, who do you like? Who do you think at the end of it's gonna win a championship this year? Maybe a Heisman front runner, and dark horse, a team like that may come out of nowhere and surprise people this year.
Just kind of going into it, I certainly think that Ohio State would have a great chance to win a national championship this year with Justin Fields, and I think the second year with Ryan Day, I'm sure that he learned a lot, in his first year as a head coach. That they'll take a step forward, but they're really, really talented on both sides of the ball. And I certainly would like them and the rest of the typical cast of characters, Clemson, Alabama, certainly right there. Oklahoma, I would expect to win the Big 12 again. All those kinds of things. Not a lot changes there. And I do think Justin Fields will win the Heisman if there's a season. If they're allowed to play all those games, I think he'd have the best chance. As far as a dark horse, maybe it's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of buzz about Oregon. I don't know if they are far down enough to be considered a dark horse, but I certainly think they are good. I think Minnesota. Minnesota is a team that's going to bring a ton of players back. Really good last year, and um, I think they would have a great chance to win that division and play for a Big Ten title. Um, I don't know how deep you want to go, but yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to pick dark horses in college football because it is sort of a sport dominated by the blue bloods. But yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting season if there is one.
Just quickly, Stephen, before you have a question, just to add to that, it's interesting that you said that because I think that for a dark horse team, a lot of times because of the way recruiting has gone, and if any of you, I mean, we've all looked at the list, the 5 and 4 stars that are going to like a handful of teams is ridiculous. When you have teams that have like 3 or 4 5 stars and then they have like the rest of their recruiting class is all 4 stars. And then you have other schools like Minnesota, for example, that are nowhere near that. For a dark horse to creep in, you have to have a year where absolutely you have to have great quarterback play. You have to have 0 players get hurt that matter because usually you don't have the same depth. We watch Alabama, they lose a quarterback and they still have a chance to win a national championship because they're that talented. And so other schools don't. So like you said, Oregon's been recruiting like crazy. They have to replace a pretty good quarterback, but they have a defense that might be amazing. But I don't know what their offense is going to look like. I'm not sure. So to your point, dark horses are difficult because so many things can happen that can derail those teams usually.
Well, on the other end of that, though, I would say this year could be the year that you do have something wild happen because of COVID. You're going to have teams that potentially have to sit players or forfeit games or all kinds of strange circumstances. I know this is odd for people to think about and hear, but winning and losing is not really the priority if there's a season. It's just kind of getting through it, and so the team that maybe has the best luck with COVID ends up kind of standing at the end, and that could be the kind of year we're in for.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I am curious, Dan, just to kind of let you go on this. Do you feel like the rift in college sports between the haves and the have-nots? Do you feel like that's going to be growing over the next couple of months? Because it's so uncertain, and I understand that. But we always talk about the Power Five and the Group of Five, and financially, just the implications of having a shortened or in worst case no football season at all, and the impact that's going to have on college sports.
Yeah, look, the thing is, though, even within the so-called haves, there's haves and have-nots.
Right.
And I think that's where you're going to end up getting, if there is a major disruption to the year, where you're going to end up getting more and more polarized. Because, look, I think for some of these Group of Five schools, they lose money on football. If they can't play football, then it will be terrible, and they may have to make some major cuts, but they're not losing out on the kind of revenue that you would lose out on as sort of a mid-tier Power Five school, who would be at risk of huge losses, and yet they are trying financially to keep up with the Ohio States, Alabamas, Floridas. So I think those are the schools that are most at risk of falling off, are the ones that are in the Power Five, but don't sort of have that backstop where they could survive a year of not having the football revenue.
That's good stuff. Dan, I could do this all day. Dan Wolken, USA Today, at Dan Wolken on Twitter. Before we let you go, what do you give our listeners kind of a sneak peek, what you got coming out? What are you working on here coming up over the next couple of days and weeks? Or are you just keeping an eye and an ear on what these conference commissioners are going to be telling us?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're in a time right now where it's just day to day and it's week to week, and it's trying to point out issues and storylines that are occurring around the country, and trying to highlight, the good, the bad, the ugly of what everyone's trying to do. But obviously the question of whether there is a season and in what form is the biggest thing in college sports right now, and frankly in quite a long time.
Yeah. Well, appreciate the time, Dan, and enjoy your work. Stay safe down there in Hotlanta. All right. We'll do it again soon.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thanks,
Dan
Dan.
Wolken, USA Today.
Doesn't it feel like spring is getting closer to being an option?
Well, it's the next step, right? I mean, they've bought themselves a month with the no non-conference schedule, and the next step is to push it back to the spring before they say we can't do it because of the health of those involved. We just can't. So,
Well, if they bought themselves a month, and this is again, because there are some teams that come out right out of the chute and had conference games week one.
yeah, a couple of
That always
SEC
happens.
and ACC schools.
It always happens. So, they could push back a regular season anyway if they wanted to. They could say we're not going to start until not September. We're going to move it back a month, and we'll still play everything the way we normally do, and it'll just bleed into basketball season. More than all of our sports overlap now anyway. So when you say that, and I get what you're saying, are we implying that maybe we keep conference schedules where you play exactly and just shorten the number of games in a season? Because that's something that hasn't really come out. I liked the idea of the Pac-12 playing everybody. Like if UCLA is going to drop its 3 non-conference games, let's add Washington and Oregon.
Sure.
And because that just makes more sense. Let's add, some big time, other division, cross conference games. And wow, you're going to get to see some games in the regular season. And yet I would be, if you really think about it, if that were to happen, it would make it harder for teams to go undefeated.
Well, the irony here, Wayne, is rehashing a discussion that you and I have all during the fall, which is why some conferences like yours play a 9-game conference schedule and others like the ACC and SEC play 8. If we already had conference standardization here in terms of number of conference games, the math would be so much easier. So, the bigger thing is whether the SEC and ACC and maybe even the Big 12 who need a dance partner because, Baylor Ole Miss week 1 isn't happening at Jerry's World. At least you would think. Speculatively, that's not going to happen. It could still happen, but maybe it happens at a later date.
What's their conference? They play 9 though, right? They play everybody.
The Big 12, yes, they do play.
They play everybody.
But
there's 10 teams and they play everybody.
The more games you can get in your schedule, the more times you're on TV, the more revenue you're able to at least bring back to your athletic department, who is, I mean, they are looking everywhere for ways to try to save money. I've seen some numbers. I think it was the Iowa State athletic director who came out and said $60 million deficit if there's no football.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a huge number.
Yeah.
So you can't make that up.
You can't.
It's be interesting because they haven't said, to your point, Wayne, they haven't said no non-con, but we are going to replace those with 1, 2, maybe 3 more conference games. That would be fantastic, but I don't know if we're there yet. I don't know if you can come out and fill that and have games in September.
So since I'll pick your brain on this, and Cerber, you can chime in if you know. The TV side of it, the TV contracts, obviously, if our schedules are changed and there's less games, is the way the contracts work. And because I have no idea. If, like, for example, if UCLA is going through their season and, they're playing terribly and they end up having more games on Pac-12 network, or they're playing really well and they're on ABC or ESPN or Fox for big-time games and important slots, how do the contracts work for that? I actually have no clue. I don't know if they get a certain amount of money and like if like Fox and ESPN and whoever says we're going to give you this much money for your season, or if it's based on if we're going to put you in this time slot, you get $10 million more. Again, just throwing out numbers. I don't know how that works.
I don't know the legalese, like the nuts and bolts of the contract language, especially considering that there's a pandemic. But each school and each conference gets the same payout. That is equal.
Right. So that's what I thought. But then how does it affect if you're in the primetime slot versus other slots?
I don't know. I don't know if there is an effect. I think it's based on number of games. So like if you're a TV partner with one of these leagues and you're saying, look, you're not giving me 12 games, you're only giving me 8, know those TV partners are going to come back and say, give us a break, cut us a discount here. We can't dole this out. So look, I mean, again, the financial ramifications here, and I know you're in LA, Wayne, but the college towns out there, the small communities like Clemson, South Carolina, like Athens, Georgia, like Gainesville, Florida, like College Station, Texas. Like if you don't have 100,000 people coming in on a Saturday to fill your coffers, so to speak.
Yeah, but for the first time in forever, UCLA lost money. I mean, they were in a deficit last year for the first time in like a long time.
I believe it. I saw those pictures
And
of the Rose Bowl last year. I believe it.
no, but it wasn't just because of that. And shut up, okay?
Love you, buddy.
For other reasons. It's difficult right now. We talked about it earlier with how much money goes into everything now. And yes, there are some big time donors at all of these programs that put a lot of money into it. It's not just coming from the school. I mean, there's people that donate a lot of money. There's a lot of fundraising that goes into this. But if you pile on a bad year and you throw in this, I mean, I hate to see it because like my wife and I were wearing masks at Laguna Beach this last couple of days. We went on a little retreat, my wife and I, with no kids, which was fantastic. And again, when we walked around Laguna Beach and we went into the shops, we ate on patios, we did everything outdoors and we did wear our masks. It was really, really enjoyable, but I totally lost my train of thought.
That's because you were thinking about
I was thinking about
what
the
happened.
beach.
the wife. With
What were we talking about before? This happens to me now as I get, the grayer and older.
Unbelievable.
I was going
We're talking
somewhere
about
with
TV
that.
money. We're talking about UCLA's deficit. No? Just total haze, huh?
Why did I talk about being gone? And
Wow.
that's bad.
That's spectacular.
Maybe
It's okay.
maybe those blows to the head did.
I didn't want to say. Is this USC 93? Is this a consequence of the
Oh my
crosstown
gosh.
rivalry in 93?
What the heck was I? And it's funny though, and I don't know you guys if this ever happens to you, but it'll come to me later. Well, there was a point that was going to be made, and I have no freaking clue where I was going with that story.
It's okay, buddy. It's all right.
I just wanted to brag about being able to go on a vacation that's 45 minutes away from my house at Laguna Beach.
It's a good thing, good timing on that because Governor Newsom is, he's shutting it all down again. So
I think, but you could still eat on patios and stuff.
Outdoors
Again,
is good.
it's just killing me that server. I'm glad that I made your day right there. I have no idea. I'm trying real hard to
we'll
find
clean it up in post, man. Don't worry.
No.
We'll take it out.
We're leaving all this in. Did you say Governor Newsom? Is that a thing? Is
Gavin.
that a nickname?
Gavin Newsom.
Yeah,
Governor
but
is funny, but no, Gavin Newsom. He shut it down.
Said Governor.
No, I don't
you
think I
said
did.
Gavin. You
No,
did, and California has a history. They had the governor.
The Governator, yeah.
And now we have the Gavinator. Got it. The Governor of California.
That's a good-looking dude, man. I mean,
yeah.
I'm not ashamed to say it. I mean, Governor Gavin Newsom, it's a handsome man.
Could you imagine if he welcomed Justin Trudeau to California for a trip? People would lose their minds.
Oh my goodness, boy, bunch of dreamboats. Hey,
Oh my gosh.
Wayne, I want to get your take on the PGA Tour, which has been happening for the last.
Tiger's playing tomorrow.
But Tiger's back, yes.
Yep.
So this podcast will drop on Thursday. Tiger.
Okay, so he's playing today then.
Is back. No, it's okay. I'm just curious, how locked in you will be. He's paired with Brooks Koepka and
Yep,
Rory
and
McIlroy for Thursday and Friday. So where's Tiger? Is he going to finish on the podium this week? You think he hoists the silverware? What's your take, man? Come on.
When Tiger played against Phil with Peyton and Tom,
How good was that, by the way? In terms
it was
of just,
amazing.
it
was
TV
absolute.
content. That was
By the way,
phenomenal.
I don't know if you guys are Phil fans, but since he's joined social media, the dude's a riot, man. He's hit 50. He's hit 50, and he's just he's awesome.
I used to hate him.
It seems like he just doesn't care anymore. He's just like, I'm going to say whatever the heck I want. He's funny. He wears those, aviator sunglasses when he plays. He still hits the ball 340. He almost falls down every time he swings. He rarely hits the fairway, but he doesn't care.
He's the anti-Bryson because he's getting smaller, and Bryson is
Well, he lost weight, but Phil's still a big dude, man. I bet you he still weighs 220.
he's a big guy.
I mean, he's my height. He's like 6'3", 6'4", I think, and he's lost weight, but he's not. He's still. Anyway, to answer your question, I think that Tiger looked amazingly smooth when he played, and I know that wasn't a tournament. But I think if there's anybody out there that doesn't really get nervous when he plays, other than maybe the normal butterflies that all athletes should get that makes them care and want to win, I think Tiger looked really smooth. Now, the fact that he hasn't been playing made me nervous. Because whenever I watch Tiger, and I don't know if you guys pay attention to this, when he bends over to pick up a ball, I always kind of watch.
Yeah.
Because he looks a little ginger, and I actually remember thinking that he looked a little ginger when he was playing in that tournament. Even though his swing looked great, I didn't. He was walking stiff, and I look for stuff like that. So I don't know if this break was a COVID break or if this break was I need to get healthy again, because I think his swing is awesome. I think his mindset is awesome.
You've been talking about Tiger for 4 minutes. You still haven't answered my question.
He's not gonna win the tournament, but
Okay.
he will be top 10.
Okay. Serbs, you wanna chime in here?
Top 10 is bold, but
It's bold because he hasn't been playing.
I think he'll be on the leaderboard somewhere after Friday and Saturday, Thursday and Friday. But on the weekend, we might see him slip a little. Top 25 would be decent.
Okay.
I think that's.
I am a huge Tiger fan. This reeks.
Of course you are.
This reeks of an MC this week.
Oh, you think he's gonna miss the cut?
I mean,
I think he's gonna play well. Remember
when he didn't miss like.
No,
you remember there was a time in our lives, and it was about a 10-year period where Tiger Woods made every single.
It was the best streak ever. I'm pretty sure.
Some of the best golf ever played. Yeah, late '90s, early 2000s. Tiger. Look, I love the guy. I will be locked in. I'm rooting for it, but they're not playing around this week. I think the rough is like 4 inches long. I mean, they are. Jack's Place is going to be on steroids for these guys.
It's a major field. I mean, the field is awesome.
Yeah.
So he's not going up against nobody. He's going up against everybody.
Look, golf without fans is it's enjoyable. It's fun.
I've enjoyed it.
You don't have idiots yelling mashed potatoes.
You're the man.
Yeah, I mean it's not the worst, and it penalizes guys who can't find the fairway because there's not fans lining the road.
By the way,
from bouncing around.
Steve, can we just a little sidebar here, just real quick?
Yeah, go for it. What you got?
Every freaking stadium and every sporting event has that idiot that actually thinks people want to hear what they have to say on a regular basis. There are people, and I know you guys have both probably been on sidelines at games before, but there are people that sit behind the opposing team's bench and yell stuff to guys that are 3 times their size and could beat them up with their pinky that you would never say on the streets. Ever.
Yeah, but Wayne,
they lay into people.
Right. They paid for the right to heckle those.
I look at those people and I'm like, holy cow! Like, how do you live with yourself? Like, I've been heckled as a sideline reporter, and I walk lots over the years, and I walk around, and every once in a while, because I think it's funny, I'll walk, and again, I think it's funny. I'm sure nobody else does, and so I'll walk up to somebody and I'll just say, hey man, what year did you play? Like, when were you out here? What year did you play?
Of course.
And all of his buddies are usually like, because they're all usually drunk and idiots. And they're like, dude, so you know so much. What year did you play, bud? Like, that's my line typically for that coach.
Unbelievable.
That like you're gonna love this, Steven, once your kids start playing, soccer and golf or whatever sport.
I hope they're allowed to play team sports in their life. That'd be great.
You will have coaches that'll recommend to your kids to play a sport year round. They'll recommend that your kid does, all that sports has turned into. Give me lots of money and I'll help your kid get a scholarship, or I'll help your kid get whatever, which is most of the time a bunch of mouth service, the lip service. And typically to those people, I'm like, dude, who are you? Like, who are you to tell my kid he needs to pay $1,000 a year to play travel soccer when he's 8, and that you've already decided what position he's going to be?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's a defender. My son kind of wants to score. No. He's a big, strong kid. He needs to play here. You're an idiot. He needs to play everything right now. He's 8. Yeah, but I'm a club coach. Yeah, but who are you? I've never heard of you before. Your name's not Messi. Your name's not. I don't know who you are. Like, and those people are everywhere. And I'm not trying to be mean and say you have to be someone to be a coach, because you don't. But I love it when people tell you how to make it that never made it.
Sure. Well,
I just think that's funny.
I mean,
sorry, that was a little.
No, that's okay. I look forward to I defer to you on the youth sports movement. I mean, you've been
good luck with it,
kids, for a while. I'm fresh out of the gates, so we're not there yet because team anything is not allowed.
You'll like Daddy Ball. It's really fun.
COVID 2020 summer, but I look forward to that, man. I'll totally volunteer to be like, hey, they have rules now, Wayne, where like the parents can't even interact
They do anyway, though.
Yeah, of
They
course.
do anyway.
Because they're a bunch of monsters.
Yeah.
What do you got going on over the next? I mean, here's the thing. And Cerber brought this up before we started the show today, and he was spot on. We did a show last week talking about on the field storylines in college football, like who's going to be the next Utah, who's going to tease us with going to the college football playoff and then totally wet the bed in the championship game, like the Utes did. And then
It's always got to be the Pac-12. It's always got to be the Pac-12.
But then the shit hit the fan, and the Big Ten comes out and says, Michigan, you're not going to Seattle. Ohio State, you're not going to Eugene.
Right.
We're not doing that. We're playing our guys. We want to be able to control what we can control. And you know, I've talked to guys that work in this industry of college sports, and every day is you're kind of holding your breath. You're waiting for the other shoe to drop. So I think we're going to get a couple weeks of wait and see. The medical miracle isn't coming. Like the vaccine isn't going to be here in time for Labor Day weekend, folks. That's not breaking news, but you know, the only other option you have after conference schedules only is spring ball. And I'm just wondering how long it takes before we get to that point. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So first, you know, I know that Alabama and Ohio State were like, whew, thank God that the Pac-12 is going to do conference only, so we don't have to go play those games. You know, it is what it is. I mean, you know, difficult non-conference games is something the Pac-12 always does.
Yeah,
it always does.
Yeah, which is
it always does.
Playoff,
you know, and then they, you know, they lose to Auburn in the last second of the game, and then the powers that be out there decide that the conference is dead and shouldn't even play football anymore.
Yeah, y'all can't hold a lead against Bo Nix, a true
freshman. But it is. Yes, go ahead, Cerber.
I have one question, kind of on the subject of you just mentioned it. You know, they don't have to play Pac-12. Should the ACC be forcing Notre Dame's hand right now? Should they be telling Notre Dame, hey, you need to join our conference in football, or you need to
much leverage? Right?
Yes. This is what's to me is amazing about this whole thing. Everybody, well, what's Notre Dame going to do? Because Notre Dame plays Stanford and USC every year. Mm-hmm. And to be quite honest with you, for Stanford and USC, they have a very tough game in the middle of their Pac-12 schedule every year.
Sure.
Every year. They don't play a nobody that we've never heard of before. They play Notre Dame. And again, so for USC and Stanford, that's a great rivalry game for them, like an extra rivalry game. But not having to play it in the current world of college sports probably gives them another win. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I mean, I hate with every ounce of my body, I hate saying that, because that game could be played if conference champions went to a playoff, and it would be about, this is an amazing game. But if you lose it by 1 on the road at Notre Dame in tall grass that's been watered before the game, so that everything's slippery and nasty. Trust me, I watched Jeff Samardzija and freaking Brady Quinn go down the field against UCLA in that stadium from the sidelines in the last minute to win a game they shouldn't have won. But I'm telling you, man, that one hurt. But it happens. But doesn't it feel like in the world we live in nowadays, like we're going away from those big marquee matchups that are non-conference? I feel like because it costs you too much as far as that opportunity to get into the playoff. So I don't know. I know I didn't answer what you were talking about, but Notre Dame to me, the fact that they're so like they're a blue blood, right? Mm-hmm. Even though how many national championships do they have since '88? 0, right? Right? I mean, like they're just like everybody else. I mean, I know our man John Jansen, you know, Michigan, they've won 1 since forever. You know, there's only a few teams like you're wearing their colors right now that have won some, and before that, how many did they win? Before Dabo, what won, right? Yeah. UCLA has won back in 1964. I mean, it's something that most schools don't have very many, if any.
Sure.
And Notre Dame though gets the idea. Well, they're an independent. Nobody's talking about BYU. What are they going to do? What should they jump in and play Pac-12 games? They usually play a lot of Pac-12 games anyway. What about the lower level schools like UMass? They're an independent. Are they even going to be able to afford football this year? Notre Dame should jump into the ACC, but in my opinion, they should just stay there. Give it up, Notre Dame.
Well,
you need to go into a conference and be a part of that conference like everybody else. And if you don't get to play this year, oh well.
I think something that Dan Wolken from USA Today said that was interesting earlier was that this season isn't about winning and losing. And I know that people aren't, and Dan mentioned this. I'm just paraphrasing. He's like, I know people don't want to hear that. But if this is about survival and getting through the year and financially being able to just keep your head above water because you're not making a profit, most athletic departments don't make a profit to begin with. But yeah, if you're the Pac-12, like, man, let BYU play y'all a few times. Or,
right.
I understand the ACC, Notre Dame's, I mean, they both kind of sort of need each other here. And so it's amicable, I would say. But yeah, Server, to your point, like, boy, if you're the ACC, you really could, if you wanted to. I mean, if you were just out for blood, you could hold Notre Dame's feet to the fire here. You really could. That's not in the spirit of what we're trying to do this summer, where we're trying to wrap our arms around each other and kind of give each other hugs. But there's so much uncertainty, and that's the thing. We're going to keep doing these shows because there's going to be college football news. Wayne, I'm hoping that it's of the on-field variety.
Yeah,
I really
right.
am.
But that's the reason we haven't heard from the ACC or SEC yet. It's because of Notre Dame, and not only Notre Dame, but the in-state rivalries of Florida and South Carolina and Georgia.
Sure.
That's the reason we haven't heard from those yet.
Well, as long as they're coming from, because if this really comes down to the money it takes to test properly, which, and again, we're not even talking about what's going to happen if in week 3 one team gets COVID and they're like, we can't play, and then you just have a bye that week. One healthy team and one sick team, and you just don't play. I mean, they could. And how many makeup dates do we have? Are we going to do it like baseball, where at the end of the year we're going to have 3 weeks set up for makeup? Which, by the way, isn't a terrible idea. Because it stretches. If the season's going to be at a weird time anyway, we have that big gap between bowl season anyway. Let's have a few weeks built into where maybe if there's games that are canceled, you can reschedule. I mean, that might have to be something that happens to do this correctly. But by the way, I'm not a Notre Dame hater. I wasn't saying that for that reason, but I do think Notre Dame at some point in time, and I know a lot of people are in different places on this, should probably join a conference. Because think about all the years where Notre Dame's kind of good, and you look at their schedule and you're like, are they a playoff team or not? You know what I mean? It's kind of a tricky thing. Now you're going to knock off 2 conference champions. Jump in the ACC and see if you can take out Clemson. That would make that conference a lot more interesting right away, because Notre Dame is kind of like Michigan. They're solid every year.
Mm-hmm.
In an era of certain teams tend to win over and over and over again, the same 4 or 5 teams, they're always really good. They're always in that next tier. They're just not quite good enough to be a national champion.
And good God, the Coastal needs another good team.
They do.
They need one good team. Excuse me.
Would you have to add 2 teams to do that?
Well, Notre Dame Clemson's on the schedule this year, and I believe it's in South Bend. So I'm not saying that Notre Dame will be favored to win that game, but as it stands, that's happening. So we'll see. So is Clemson Florida State, although that hasn't been competitive for the last several years. So
get a book.
Wayne, when that thought that you had about you and your wife being in that hotel in Laguna Beach comes back to you, you shoot me a text and we'll add it to
We'll add it in.
Okay. All right.
I have no clue. It's sad. This happens to me as a teacher sometimes too, where I'll actually ask the kids, I go, you guys, I know I went down a tangent, but can you remember where I started? And the kids will start going through, think, well, you said this, and as you guys can imagine, I am that teacher that goes off on tangents from time to time.
Happens.
And they usually reel me in. You guys just don't pay attention. That's why you can't figure out where I was going.
That's not true. Again, you weave these webs, and so I let you go until I have to kind of give you the governor. Thank you to Dan Wolken from USA Today for stopping by. That was good stuff. And we will be back until next time at CS Now Tweets on Twitter. For Wayne Cook and Michael Serber, I'm Stephen Hartzell. We're out. Talk to y'all later.